Can I interest you in a new post-apocalyptic MMO with zombies and PvP that actually isn't a half-baked rug pull like the day before and comes from a reputable developer? What about a new MMO being created by legendary Ultima Online and Star Wars Galaxy developer Ralph Koster, where the galaxy itself is a bit of a simulation? Or how about something a bit more classically inspired, like an EverQuest successor torn straight out of the pages of a D&D manual? No? Still not interested because you're really hard to please? Well, what about some like balls to the wall PvP that relies a lot on like social engineering and guild versus guilds? Or how about a crazy action combat MMO that may or may not have good or bad monetization that we don't really know about yet? Or you know what? Hey, how about one of the MMOs that's one of my favorites that's like just trying to define what it means to be a classic like MMO, kind of like a Souls-like, but for MMOs. It feels weird to say, but there's actually some really exciting MMOs in 2025. A year I was initially concerned would be leaner than 2024, which had big titles like Throne and Liberty and Blue Protocol launching. But hey, from disappointment comes potentially more disappointment, but also maybe some hope. It's the beginning of the year, at least when I'm recording this. I don't know when you're watching this, but at least there could be some hope, some optimism right now, right? That's how this works. Optimism at the beginning of the year, sadness at the end. These are my top 10 MMOs that I'm watching in 2025 for substantial updates and potential actual releases. This top 10 list, it's not actually a top 10 list. Like the list of games is not in order of quality as much as just that's how they popped into my head. I'm just being honest. But I'm gonna try really hard to be not as long-winded as I usually am on this one. Our first MMO is going to be Stars Reach. And I'm putting it in pole position here largely because it splashed onto the stage out of seemingly nowhere, and it's promising a whole lot of freedom. For years, I've been wanting a successor to Star Wars Galaxies, even if it was just a spiritual successor to Star Wars Galaxies. And so far, Stars Reach seems to be aiming for that crown. Even if the crown is a little more general audience than some of the fans of Star Wars Galaxy's original Rancor and Imperial Infested Incarnation were actually wanting from that spiritual successor. Stars Reach is the sandbox MMO being developed by Playable Worlds, which is helmed by Ralph Koster of Ultima Online and SWG fame, as well as Dave Georgeson, who was the driving force behind EverQuest Landmark. I mentioned Dave specifically because after playing Stars Reach for a little bit, one of the things that really stood out to me were the similarities from that to Landmark, although with significantly different physics to the game. For the SWG connection, Stars Reach has the skill systems that SWG had, the camp system, it even has the entertainer system. But at its core, it is a game that is promising thousands of planets with weathering and decay, with growth, with forest fires and waterfalls, soil that can collapse in on itself or turn to glass if heated, water that can be steamed to the point of drying up, or even frozen to create an ice skating rink that you can yeet yourself off the side of.
If any of them are watching the stream, but if they are, they should say hi in game.
So if I just stored my life in the camp,
yep,
hypothetically, I could go fling myself off the edge of the cliff and I'll be...
Yes, you could.
Okay, just hypothetically.
Hypothetically, the tall edge is the one to my left.
Now, what happens...
Stars Reach is basically promising a sandbox, and while I initially had some concerns that there wasn't going to be enough around the sandbox, not enough developer-created content, Ralph Koster has actually themselves come and commented that they have the ability, at the very least, to make some of those things like a Naboo or a Theed. Well, Theed is on Naboo, you know what I mean. Basically create curated content as necessary to kind of box in the game as it's required. Because a sandbox is great, but if you just throw a bunch of people in it, there's probably just going to be a lot of poop in it. I lost the analogy there. Let's move on to the next game. Yeah, let's real quick. But time for editing Redbeard Flynn to jump in and ruin that beautiful, beautiful feces-laden transition to another game. Because as I was editing this, we got some actually different news on Stars Reach to start the year. They're actually starting a Kickstarter. A Kickstarter is in a bit of a different way than some that we've seen in the past, because this is kind of a more late stage Kickstarter for the game. The game has already raised close to $40 million and already has a playable product, although it is still very, very early, and obviously a lot of things are currently missing in the game. The Kickstarter, as described, is generally to kind of kickstart and put on the gas of this game and increase the speed at which they can develop. As Raph Koster put it, quote, "It's time we ask you guys for help. We need your help in getting this out in your hands. We've worked for 4.5 years without talking much about what we've been doing. We are not that far away from being able to call this game an alpha. It's measured in months, not years." Adding about the Kickstarter, quote, "The big thing that this will unlock for us is the ability to hit the gas. We really need to invest more in adding art and scaling things. Letting more people into the game is one of the things a successful Kickstarter will allow us to do." Now, the Kickstarter, it will have rewards, but they have said that the rewards will not be a way to like disrupt the in-game economy or anything like that. We'll just have to wait and see exactly what happens because it hasn't fully rolled out by the time of me doing this video. But keep in mind that as with anything, the Kickstarter is an investment that may or may not actually pay off. There have been many failed Kickstarters in the past. There have been many MMOs that have gone through this process and have not been able to launch. So always, in these situations, consider your options. If you have the money to do it and you're interested, go for it. If you don't have the money to do it, or you're not interested and you do have the money, don't do it. You're an adult, you can make that decision. Don't listen to people like me if we tell you to do it or not. Make your own choices. I'm just gonna shut up now. Pantheon Rise of the Fallen launched in December of 2024 into early access, a continued testing phase for the long in development social-focused, challenging PvE MMO that's looking to chart a path that was never taken in 2004. This is the classic-like. A path where an MMO tries to evolve from the tenets of EverQuest, looking at what EverQuest did right, what World of Warcraft did right, and trying to recreate that wonderful feeling of exploration, excitement, and achievement, along with a healthy dose of fear that so many of us felt in MMOs in the early days of the genre, especially the EverQuest days. In about a year, this game made a tremendous turnaround from all the negativity surrounding it to end of 2023, to launching into early access with about 6,000 players on Steam, probably closer to about 8,000 or 9,000 players total, and mostly positive reviews as well. 2025 will be the year to watch to see if they can capitalize on this new momentum and pull the game closer and closer to an eventual 1.0 launch, something that would include more content for the game that currently exists, more questing, more lore, and the perception system, among other things. But speaking of momentum and a 1.0 launch, we gotta talk about some PvP in another game. It is with deep, unrelenting, terrible, awful, horrific, other words from the thesaurus, sorrow, that I must announce I will never make another MMO video on Ashes of Creation, because, or I suppose we could actually just talk about the game and its current state of alpha and that it's in testing and that people can play it right now and stuff like that, and how 2025 is going to be a big year. Let's go back to the actual talk about it. Ashes of Creation launched into Alpha 2 and dropped their NDA in 2024. It is the first time that players got to get into the game and actually show the game in its current state. It's had somewhat mixed opinions, but there's players that are absolutely loving it and players that are absolutely hating it. I'm expecting 2025 to kind of be where that levels off a little bit and it becomes more of a medium ground, something that's probably necessary for a game that is still fairly early in development. But what is Ashes? Ashes of Creation is a PvX MMO built on the idea of conflict and exploration. I want to highlight the first part of conflict, because even though this is a PvX MMO, meaning PvE and PvP, It is very much a PvP MMO, which we'll get to here in just a moment. It is a game with an evolving world tied to node systems that grow with the players and are destroyed by the players. Hell, this MMO even has seasons in the game and rivers with current. It really is trying to be a living world in a sense. But as I was saying, it's a game that leans very heavily into PvP with its always on PvP, guild wars, and caravan system, and it's finally out in the wild. Archeage Creation is a very pretty game in Unreal Engine 5, with some really impactful animations and some good looking vistas. But it is also an incomplete game, like Pantheon, like Stars Reach, and many others on this list. With these games, we're getting to see them built from the blueprint out, and that can at times be pretty ugly. Archeage only got out of the shadows of the NDA very, very recently, so I'd put the end of 2024 firmly in the adjustment category that Pantheon went through at the beginning of 2024 and the end of 2023. It's that time when players who poured their hopes into an MMO get to see it for the first time, and some will bounce off, but for others it will show the promise of what it can be. 2025 will be a very interesting year for Archeage Creation as they work to get more systems online, iron out the kinks in their systems that are now actually being actively stressed by thousands of players that are willing and able to do their absolute worst. And really, Archeage Creation for many is going to be the next big MMO, and 2025 will be their chance to prove it to them. It's also their chance to disprove that cutthroat PvP is often a fermenting ground for toxicity. Though as a player of Ultima Online and a player of EverQuest, when raids were contested and camps are contested, some might actually say that competitive PvE has plenty of room to ferment toxicity. I've been toxic at times, I'm not gonna lie. I think I've matured. Speaking of contested PvE though, not to say that there's toxicity, I'm really bad at transitions in this list. Monsters and Memories. We're moving on from Unreal Engine 5 PvP extravaganza that is Archeage Creation to the old world Dungeon & Dragon-esque charm of Monsters and Memories, another indie MMO that should be getting a lot more action in 2025 than in previous years, largely because this game is sprinting toward its own early access period, aiming to start early access in 2026 with expanded testing in 2025. Monsters and Memories is a very classically inspired MMO with a direct connection to EverQuest, as this lead dev is a former EverQuest developer themselves. It's a team of passionate developers working hard to bring their vision to life. With their stylized look reminiscent of old D&D books and deep, dark dungeons to claim you and your party, it promises a hardcore but thrilling experience. If you're looking for those really classic EverQuest vibes, like 1999 EverQuest vibes, or really just to learn how and why EverQuest itself used D&D and multi-user dungeons as inspiration, keep an eye out for the extra testing for Monsters and Memories in 2025. In the limited tests that I've been able to do for this game, I really enjoyed not even so much just the combat of the game as much as just going out and exploring, because the world is very intriguing. I wanted to go and look around every corner and see what was waiting for me. What was waiting for me was usually death, but at the same time, it was a lot of fun dying. 2025 has already started out with a bang for this game, as the game is already updated into Unity 6. They've talked about mounts and player housing. They've shown off some new zones reminiscent of Ocean of Tears, and we barely just started the year. A year that may be setting the foundation for this game for a very explosive 2026. But what if you really don't want any of that classic crap? What if you're like, you know what, I want pretty graphics, I want the next big thing, I don't want that anymore, I want something new. Well, how about something that can change time? Chrono Odyssey has been a bit of a mystery since it was first announced. Developed by NPixel and published by Kakao Games, the action combat MMO has a compelling central mechanic: time manipulation. What we've seen so far of the game, which is likely going to be a beautiful theme park MMO, is absolutely gorgeous. one of potentially the prettiest MMOs coming to the market in 2025. And one line from a report from mmorpg.com has me a bit more hopeful than usual. Quote, although the game is Korean, its monetization model is reportedly designed for Western audiences, forgoing predatory pay-to-win mechanics in favor of buy-to-play. Now, we've heard that before. We've heard that a couple times about other games that didn't turn out to be what happened. So skepticism is warranted, but at least it's being said. I'd rather them say that than say, yeah, well, you know what? How about loot boxes? So Chrono Odyssey sounds like an MMO that will be much more focused on PvE, utilizing its 6 classes and all their customization to make a compelling experience. It's one of the MMOs we know the least about, but the PvE focus and potentially for it not being pay to win, as well as its beauty, makes it kind of worth at least considering. Kakao's Q3 2024 financials pegged Chrono Odyssey's tentative release date as Q4 2025, so toward the end of the year. So here's hoping we get some kind of details on it by summer or fall before its release, and that it doesn't get delayed into 2026. But one game we're pretty sure we're going to be getting very, very soon, and might be actually pretty good, or completely not an MMO, in all honesty. And one that actually has also mentioned Star Wars Galaxies as an inspiration for it. It's coming from a developer many of us know, Funcom. Dune Awakening. It's made by Funcom, who made MMOs like Age of Conan and Secret World, and shared worlds like Conan Exiles. Some of the concern around Dune Awakening right now is whether it'll be more like Conan Exiles than, say, Age of Conan. But now they're tackling yet another huge IP in Dune, and this MMO will be launching in early 2025. The new MMO will lean into PvP and PvP with a homesteading build mechanic and survival mechanics. There will be safe areas, but heavy incentive to go into the deep zones for PvP, where you will gain valuable resources, valuable spice. In videos and dev explanations we've seen of the game, it sounds like it'll lean into Funcom's experience making survival games like Conan Exiles as well, with of course the base building, but also things to deal with like sun exposure, which I deal with every day. It's scary. The sun is my enemy. Always. This is one of the more unique games on the list, and one that I'm excited to see what exactly comes from it. It's really like the thrill of the unknown, I guess. The merging of survival elements with MMO elements could work, although in the past it's often seemed a bit gimmicky. Honestly, just the fact that in this game I can be a sword master, and that I at least once mentioned Star Wars Galaxy as an influence, I'm gonna at least try it. So if Dune Awakening is a game that you're gonna have to worry about the sun, you're gonna have to worry about how much water you have, you're gonna have to go into PvP areas that may be kind of terrifying, well, the next game is decidedly not that at all. Brighter Shores is a very casual point-and-click MMO that looks, feels, and plays a lot like RuneScape, which is not exactly shocking given it's being developed by Andrew Gower, who helped make the original RuneScape. It's a free-to-play MMO on Steam right now with the optional subscription, which opens up more content. And to start 2025, it's addressing one of its biggest criticisms since it launched into early access back in November of 2024. The resetting of professions as you moved into a new episode. This is in direct response to the player criticism of the previous system, and now they'll be moving to a single combat profession across all episodes, where each episode will have enemies that increase in 30 or 40 level ranges. Episode 1 will be 0 to 30, episode 2 30 to 60, episode 3 60 to 100, etc. There's more to it than this, like including a new end game mechanic to extend combat in each of those levels, but that's more than I want to get into in this video. Instead, I really wanted to point to the fact that they're responding to this critique from players during their early access period and making a pretty drastic change, even though initially they really didn't want to. That bodes well for the rest of 2025 with this game, with a planned launch about 6 months from when it went into EA in November, putting its official launch of all things go well sometime during the middle of 2025. If you're looking for something very casual with humorous clue-based quests, give Brighter Shores a try. It's free, at the least. It's free to try it, so you can see if it's for you. It's very casual though, very casual. I didn't mean, well, I didn't mean to put like MMOs that are so different from each other right next to each other in this list. But let's go from Brighter Shores to Star Citizen.
There it goes.
Oh my god. There it goes. Why is there someone with a gown there?
I don't know.
Okay, y'all have to see my POV. The most expensive MMO ever made that's not yet made, that is somehow still roughly in the same ballpark as making a Call of Duty game, apparently. Star Citizen is a lot of things. Playing it now, more often than not, feels like an incredible flight simulator with over-the-top UI elements and realism, and then not much else, and bugs and crashes. Yes, it has missions and shooting and planets, but a lot of those planets are mostly bare. But they've just introduced a new update that increased their previously anemic 100 player size servers to server sizes of about 600, which is already a big sign of progress of making the game more like an MMO and less like a small group spacefaring adventure. In a recent letter to mark the end of 2024, they mentioned that 2025's focus for Star Citizen is playability, with 3 critical areas: performance, stability, and content. And in all cases, Star Citizen could use improvements in those areas. It's not really a prove it year for Star Citizen. 12 years and $700 million in, the game is known for what it is and what it is not, but it may be a terminal year. As financially, despite the incredibly huge amount raised, CIG has been struggling enough to lay off over 100 employees throughout 2024, including some executives more recently. CIG is targeting 2026 for releasing Squadron 42, its single-player campaign with the likes of Mark Hamill, and perhaps even a 1.0 of Star Citizen. There's a reason for skepticism, of course. I think skepticism is the default when it comes to Star Citizen, as release dates have been missed before, but we may be finally nearing the end of the road. At least, nearing the end of the road one way or another. Question is how? But here's hoping for the best, because the genre needs this game to launch. Badly. Editing Redbeard here, because I edited this and I was thinking oh, that's it came across a little ominous. And then I read some more reports on Star Citizen, and a lot of it is looking rough for 2025. That this could really be a year where they kind of have to put up or shut up at this point. While the layoffs that they've had, including executive layoffs and resignations, it really sounds like they need to ship their final product. So we'll just have to wait and see if that happens or not. But whatever does happen with Star Citizen, it will inevitably have a reverberating effect over the MMORPG market, just because of how big this game has become and how much it has impacted things like Kickstarter and indie MMOs in general, as well as even just monetization models for MMOs. So 2025 really is going to be a very interesting year for Star Citizen. Our next MMO is another very, very pretty one. But is it an MMO or is it an action RPG? Will monetization be fair or will it be a dumpster fire? Will it actually launch in 2025 because it's already been delayed before? Those are some of the questions surrounding action MMORPG Archeage Chronicles. Essentially, Archeage 2, which looks to be moving away from much of what its first iteration looked like in Archeage and going for a broader, more PvE-focused audience. It looks absolutely gorgeous. It will be complete with life skills like farming and crafting. It will even have player homes, which are expected to be a very important part of the game. And then of course, the crazy looking action combat. It'll include both solo and group content, but given it's more of a modern MMO, I imagine it'll probably lean more into the solo content, especially since, well, they aren't actually calling it an MMO. They're calling it an online action RPG. It's one of those games that absolutely passes the eye test, but there are legitimate concerns around monetization after that in large part tanked a lot of players' joy in the previous Archeage. Even Archeage Unchained, which was supposed to be free of the whale-itis, but it labored largely under a disconnect from that reality. In a sense, we've seen it before. Let's see what happens. But Archeage Chronicles has the potential to be the largest full MMO release of 2025 if it's not awful. The last game to round out the list is one that I have a complicated relationship with, Corepunk. Corepunk is an ARPG inspired MMO, or perhaps it is a League of Legends inspired MMO. Maybe it's the only Riot MMO that we'll ever get. Basically, it looks and plays a lot like if you took League of Legends and plopped it into an open world with PvE and PvP driven by quests and hunting. It launched into early access at the tail end of 2024 and was subsequently hit with server issues that have plagued its earlier testing phases. But it's a game that continues to try to push forward among years upon years of challenges, some internal and some external, like, well, freaking war, as the core development studio is based out of Kyiv, Ukraine. Corepunk itself plays fairly well. I have personally struggled with some design choices like not having passive regen for everyone, but it's chugging along as a top-down MMO that sections off zones for PvP and PvE, much like an Albion Online. Combat itself, when you do get to engage with it, felt solid, and a wide variety of classes to choose from, as well as customization for them, made this game feel exciting. 2025 is a year of really trying to make things work for Corepunk. Like some of the other MMOs on this list, it's a year for them to show that it's using their early access well, taking player feedback and making noticeable progress with the game. So that's the 10 MMOs that I was thinking of, but how about some bonuses? Because I lied and I was long-winded as hell on this anyway. Let's just add 2 more. The first is going to be, honestly, morbid curiosity. The Quinfall. The Quinfall may be one of the only 2 games I've ever steadfastly suggested players avoid on this channel. That and Legends of Aria Classic. In large part because I believe in giving the benefit of the doubt when there's an earnest effort being made. I'm just not sure that that's the case with the Quinfall. It's an MMO that can't really be defined because it's defining itself as everything. It has crafting, house building, PvP, PvE, ship wars, player worlds, and deep world building, all in a hyper-realistic world with smooth gameplay, even in higher player counts and crowded environments. Some of that is quite literally word for word from their Steam page. The Quinfall comes from a developer that may or may not have changed their name, from another developer of another MMO, a game that may or may not have an actual office, an MMO that may or may not be an asset flip in Unreal Engine, and it's supposed to launch into early access in 2025. Actually, by the time you're watching this video, it might already be out on January 24th, 2025. This might be, one might say, the day before it launches into early access in January of 2025. I'll be trying it out regardless to hopefully say how wrong I was and that this is the best MMO ever, or to warn you not to pay for it. One of the 2. We'll see. But how about a nice surprise? A surprise pick. Persist Online. I want to talk to you about a game that you might not even know about yet. A post-apocalyptic PvP/VE MMO from one of the longest running MMO developers out there, Cipsoft, who made Tibia, which has been online since 1997. They're moving from 2D to 3D with Persist Online, and it is their new MMO that is fueled by the passion by the devs who wanted to actually just play this game that they're making. That was their goal, to make a game for them to play. And now they're moving this game into a larger arena. It is a post-apocalyptic zombie MMO. It's being billed as a hardcore MMO that sounds a whole lot like an MMORPG version of Project Zomboid. It won't be very hand-holdy, and it matters where you start in the world. Outside of strongholds, PvP is always on, adding danger to the world far beyond the zombies who inhabit it. It's been compared to Tarkov, DayZ, and PUBG already. In their latest blog post outlining 2025, they talked about how they want to do more testing opportunities and incorporating tester feedback in that year. It's still pretty early for this game, and there's no telling what their cadence will be to get this game out there, but it's an exciting new entry, so that's why I've thrown it into this as my surprise pick. But now that we've been through 12 different MMOs for 2025, you might notice some glaring omissions. Of course, like the bigger MMOs, but that's just because they're the bigger MMOs, and I wanted to give you something you don't already know about. But there's also some games that I didn't include on this list that you may have thought I would, and that's largely because we might not get much information on them in 2025. EverQuest 3, for example, is still very, very, very early, and to say I'm starting 2025 a little concerned is probably right on the money. Recent news has shown that some other parts of EG7 are actually struggling to begin the year. They already have layoffs at another studio to begin the year. The roadmaps we got for EverQuest and EverQuest 2 are pretty sparse, so I'm a little worried. I don't know exactly what's going on, but we'll have more information in February of 2025 for sure. I almost said 2024. I'm not ready for this year, y'all. Project Ghost is making progress, but it's also extremely early, and I don't expect to hear that much, except just continued ongoing development. Evercraft Online is one that I'm excited about, but I'm not sure how active they'll be compared to some of the other games on this list. And there's some other games that are more out there, like Project L, the first-person shooter game. I don't know. We haven't heard much about that game. It should still be coming this year, so perhaps we get an FPS MMO, but that's where we're at for so far for 2025 at this moment. My name is Edward Flynn. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time so much, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. Chrono Odyssey sounds like the MMO Chrono Liberty. Shit. Chrono Odyssey